for shared reading. This week's shared reading is going to be over Young Frank Architect. Remember, when we do shared reading, we'll be reading the book together. So if you will go and get your HMH book, Volume 5, and turn to page 110. If you need to, pause the video, go get your book, and then come back and join me. All right, so we are going to be reading Young Frank Architect, and as we read, we are going to be discussing setting. I know you've learned a lot about setting already, but we're going to review our setting anchor chart. Remember, when we think about setting, the important questions we want to ask are where. What do we want to ask? Where. Where does this story happen? And you see lots of different pictures of where a story could happen, right? On a train, in a castle, in outer space, anywhere in the world, a home, a building, out in nature. You also want to think about when. When does the story take place? Does it tell you what time? Is it daytime or nighttime? Sometime in the past, in history? Does it tell you a certain month or year that it happens? Is there a season that's mentioned? I also want to talk to you a little bit about how, and we're going to see this in Young Frank Architect, the setting can change throughout the story. Some stories have the same setting throughout, but a lot of stories have a setting that changes. Now, after you've identified the setting and thought about where and when the action's taking place, it's really important that we don't stop there. We want to keep thinking. We want to stretch our minds. So after we've identified what the where and when of the setting is, we want to think about why. What do we want to ask ourselves? Why? Why is the setting important? Why is that setting so important to the story? Why does it matter to that story that that author chose that setting, that where and when they wanted the story to take place? So we want to take some time and reflect on why the setting that was chosen is important as we read. And that's not just with this story, but with all stories, we want to keep that in mind. All right, so we're going to set our purpose for reading. We've talked a little bit about setting, and I want you to know that we are going to read Young Frank Architect together. And as always, we know that good readers don't just want to be able to read the words. That's very important. But we also want to understand and comprehend what we're reading. So good readers do stop and thinks. So we're going to stop and think. When we do some stop and thinks, I want you to be able to tell me the where and when. I'm going to ask you to use this sentence to explain. The setting in this part of the story is, then, are you ready? Here's our big one. By the end, I want you to be able to tell me how. How the story changed with the setting, and then why. Why was that setting important? Why was it important that it changed? So, throughout the story, we're going to do some stop and thinks where you're going to tell me the setting of in this part of the story is, so you show me you identify the setting, and then Super Smarties, you are going to tell me the setting changed from blank to blank in parts of the story because, my favorite word, you're going to be able to tell me why that setting changed by the end of us reading the story together. Okay, are you ready? Everybody's on page 110. Our prepare to read says, realistic fiction stories are made up, but they could happen in real life. You're going to look for characters who act and talk like real people, settings that are real places, events that could really happen. And we already said that our purpose is going to be to identify the setting, and then that's the when and the where, and then be able to explain how it changed and why it was important to have that setting and those changes. All right, Young Frank Architect. by Frank Viva. I want to make sure that we understand that an architect is someone whose job it is to design buildings. Here's Frank. All right, I'm going to get my tracking finger. I'm going to put it underneath the words to help me track along. Young Frank's apartment is on the top floor of this tall building. He is an architect. He lives with his spotted dog, Eddie, and his grandpa, Old Frank, who is also an architect. We see some pictures, don't we, that are going to help us. Remember that as you look for the setting, you want to find evidence both in the text that you're reading, but also make sure that you look for evidence, clues in the pictures about where the setting is. Like right now, I see some apartment buildings, so I'm thinking they must be in a city. Young Frank makes things. He uses anything he can get his hands on. Macaroni, books, dishes, spoons, dogs? Dogs? Not Eddie. Yes, even Eddie, but only sometimes. One morning, young Frank made a chair using toilet paper rolls. Oh, did you see that? There was a clue about the setting. Did you see that it says one morning? Remember that when something happens is a part of identifying the setting as well. So they're in an apartment. I can tell that from the pictures. They're in their apartment and it's morning. Said Old Frank. I don't think architects make chairs. And you can't really sit in this one, can you? I guess not, said young Frank. He also made a skyscraper out of books. Buildings should be straight, said Old Frank, not twisted and wiggly. Hey, are those my books? He's trying to give him advice, isn't he, on how to become a really good architect. Okay, I want you to look closely at the next few pages we are going to read. I want you, after we read these few pages, I'm going to ask you to do a stop and think. I want you to be able to tell me the where and the when. Look for evidence in the text. Look in the pictures, in the words that you read, and I want you to be able to tell me the setting in this part of the story is. So keep that in mind as we're reading. I want you looking and thinking, because that's what good readers do. They read the words and they're also thinking, taking time to think about what they're reading and getting meaning from it. So think about that setting as we read. Just before lunch, young Frank designed a whole city. Said Old Frank. Cities are made one building at a time and take hundreds of years. At lunch, young Frank said, Grandpa, I'm not sure I want to be an architect anymore. Said Old Frank. I know. Let's go to the museum. I think it will be very good for you to see the work of some real architects. Don't you? Okay. I want you to look back at this page, think about the words that we read, and look at this page. Think about what you see and the words that you read. Take a minute and and think about what the setting is. Where and when does this part of the story take place? I'll give you some time to stop and think. Good readers reflect and think about what they've read. Okay, I would like you to tell me the setting and this part of the story is. Go ahead. Well, you did some wonderful thinking on the setting. So you're right. The setting in this part of the story is around lunchtime. And we know that because here it says just before lunch. And then here they are eating lunch. So that's the when did it happen. And the where, we can tell the where part of the setting is they are in their apartment. And we can also tell that the apartment is in a big city. Look at all those skyscrapers. All right, great job on that. We're gonna go ahead and continue reading. So you should be on page 121. The picture looks like this. Put your finger under the word I. You're doing a great job, keep it up. I haven't been to the museum in years and years, said old Frank. Me neither, said young Frank. On the page, they saw lots of things, including a wiggly chair designed by an architect named Frank. Old Frank looked at it sideways. A twisted tower by an architect named Frank. Old Frank cleaned his glasses. They also saw a giant model of a whole city designed by another architect named Frank. Are all architects named Frank? Asked young Frank. I don't think so, said old Frank. Okay, let's talk about how the setting changed here. The setting in this part of the story is, well, now we know it's after lunch is the when, right? Because they ate lunch and then they went here. Where did they go? Where are they? Yeah, they're at the museum for this part. This part of the story takes place after lunch in the museum that's in the big city. Great job. All right, ready? Put your finger under the word when. We're on page 125. When they got home, old Frank said, architects really do make chairs and twisted towers and cities too. I guess I was wrong. That's okay, Grandpa, said young Frank. Even I don't know some things. Okay, I want you to pay really close attention again because we're going to read these next few pages and then I'm going to ask you to do a stop and think and tell me about how the setting has changed again. And I want you to think about why that setting keeps changing too. Because remember, you're going to have to answer the setting changed from blank to blank in parts of the story because I'm going to think about why did the author choose to do that. Okay. That evening, young Frank and old Frank made chairs. Chairs with zigzags. Chairs with crazy legs. And a little chair that was perfect for Eddie. They made buildings of every shape and size. Tall ones, fat ones, round ones, and ones made from chocolate chip cookies. Eddie, don't eat the library, said young Frank, and please get back to your chair. Look, where are they? They're building lots of things. That's the action. Where are they? When is it? When they were done, they had a whole city. Woof, said Eddie. Shh, Eddie, said young Frank. Stay until I tell you. Good boy. Later that night, when young Frank was tucked in his bed, he felt a bit, oh, did you see that? I said the word big. I said he felt a big older. And then I realized that didn't sound right. Do you know what good readers do when they make a mistake? Good readers, when they read something, they realize it sounds funny. They don't just keep going because they want what they're reading to make sense. So they stop, they go back, and they try again. So I'm going to back up a little bit and read that again because he felt a big older does not make sense, and I want my reading to make sense. Later that night, when young Frank was tucked in his bed, he felt a bit older. Oh, that makes sense. The word was bit. Like a real architect. For his part, old Frank felt younger and a little wiser. So they learned something from each other, didn't they? And they worked together. Okay, I want you to think about this part of the story. It said that evening they started working and they built together. Think about where they are, when it is, and then think about this part of the story. I want you to stop and think for a minute. I want you to be able to tell me the setting in this part of the story is. Think for a minute. All right, you're looking for that evidence in the words and in the pictures in the story like good readers do. I'm so proud of you. You're working so very hard. Okay, so tell me, how has the setting changed? The setting in this part of the story is good job, you're right. So now young Frank and old Frank, they're back at home. Unlike before though, it's changed. So it changed from museum to back at home. And it's not morning or before lunch anymore. It's evening time, right? And then it gets so late that it's nighttime and time for bed. We see them in their beds. Great job thinking about the setting. All right, let's look at the very end, the last page. Woof, said Eddie. Oh, there's Eddie. He's in the dark at night, surrounded by the whole city that they built in this part of the story. Okay, I want you to think about this one, the how and the why. Remember we said that good readers think about the setting. They think about the where and the when, and you did a fantastic job of that. You were able to identify every time what the setting was when I stopped and asked you to think. Now, I want you to use my favorite word, the word because. And I love the word because it makes you sound like a genius. Anytime you use because, you're explaining more, you're telling more. And when you tell more, that means you're thinking harder. All right, so I want to know the setting changed from blank to blank in parts of the story because. Why did that setting change? Why do you think the author chose to have that setting changed? That's great thinking. So the setting changed from before lunch in the apartment to after lunch in the museum in parts of the story Because the author wanted to have them travel to the museum, right? Because when the museum is the place where old Frank really learned that there are many ways to be an architect, right? Old Frank learned that, and that's where young Frank got inspired, because right before he was thinking maybe he didn't want to be an architect, and he needed to go to that museum to get inspired that he does still want to be an architect, and that there were many ways to do things, that he was on the right track. Okay, how about this one? Why did the setting change from before lunch in the apartment to in the evening in the apartment and then nighttime? Why did it change there? What was the reason for that? Good thinking. So one reason why the author probably chose to do that is he wanted them to have time to, it showed in the morning what they were working on, and then right before lunch, it showed that young Frank was working on all these things, and old Frank was telling him, well, that's not really what architects do. And then, you know, the setting changed to the museum where they had that opportunity to learn something. And then it took it back from kind of where the problem started back to the apartment, and we see the solution that then after they had learned some things more about what an architect does, they spent that time together back at the apartment where they had started, but this time we see them building, they're working together and building all kinds of things as architects together based on what they had learned. And they did this in the evening, and then it shows us that they had so much fun doing this that they worked all the way until nighttime, until bedtime. The setting changed to, it was still in the apartment, but it was nighttime. And the author wanted to show us, I think, that they were having so much fun after they learned more about being architects. They had so much fun working together, building things, that they didn't want to stop until it was time for bed. All right, I just want to tell you thank you so much. I want to make sure that all of you Vickers Lions know how very, very proud we are of you. You have continued to work so very hard. I can tell your brains are still thinking and going. You're doing excellent reading, and you just did some fantastic, genius conversation explaining setting to me. All right, I'll see you next time. Thank you for working so hard. Bye.